Hi everyone, Sinead here again from the National Menopause Summit, and welcome everybody to our next menopause supports. Absolutely delighted today to be chatting with Katie Ridge. Katie is one of our keynote speakers at the event in the morning session on menopause in the workplace. And Katie is the head of employer relations at Adair HRM. Katie is also a barrister at law with substantial employment law knowledge and practical HR knowledge. So this woman is top of her game. So we're delighted, or I'm delighted, should I say, to chat with her this morning. And of course, we're delighted to be here today having this discussion, particularly in light of the fact that we're now celebrating World Menopause Awareness Month, which is terrific. And of course, the National Menopause Summit. So Katie, thank you so much for your time this morning. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting me, Sinead, and I am too looking forward to going to the second Menopause Summit in the real capital. And we too are looking forward in my workplace to celebrating World Menopause Day. In fact, we have determined that October is Women's Month in my workplace. So we're focusing on quite a number of things, but obviously the menopause is key in there.
Oh my God, that's fantastic. Well, that's super to hear. So Katie, as you're aware, and just in case there's anybody out there that isn't aware, we're really honoured and delighted to have Roderick O'Gorman TD, who's Minister for Equality and a number of other things, including children inclusion, etc. But we'll just focus on equality for the sake of this conversation. So the Minister is joining us in Cork to officially close out the summit, which is terrific news, and we're delighted about that. And everyone may be aware that quite recently the Minister announced plans that the government are going to commission research around supporting women in menstruation and menopause in the workplace. And this is all being done in an effort to inform employer policy moving forward. So in other words, to inform the introduction, if you like, of menopause supports. Katie, do you feel at any point in the future that, and I know you don't know, but just from your own, in terms of your own opinion, that you think at some point there'll be any statutory protection introduced in that regard?
Well, I suppose the first thing I would say is it's really heartening to have somebody at the level of minister to attend at the summit, and also with the background that there is an undertaking in terms of research around this area that has come onto the agenda, I think, in the last sort of 18 months. I think that the situation as is we have dealt for quite a number of years very well with I suppose, the early stage of the menstrual cycle when it comes to the workplace. And I'm particularly thinking in terms of maternity provisions.
Yeah.
And, any woman in an Irish workplace would, I think, acknowledge that there are significant and robust protections around health and safety and wellness, and indeed the protection of their position of employment as a consequence of pregnancy. But for a range of reasons, and I've no doubt we will get into chewing over them at the summit, there's a dearth of and an absence of any statutory protection when it comes to the latter end of the fertility cycle of working women. So we don't have any protections at the moment, and one would hope that there would be endeavours to capitalise in terms of the awareness and the benefits that indeed legislative provisions can give. I think it's important, and if I was asked to contribute to the research, I would be saying that you have a level playing pitch by virtue of introducing statutory protections. So regardless of the sector you work in, the size and the largesse of that organisation, if it is on the statute books, then it is applicable to everybody regardless.
Yes.
We want to get to that point in terms of protections around menopause and women experiencing menopause in our workplaces, so that we have this level playing pitch and it isn't left up to the medical and or the private sector employers to determine, what it is they are amenable to, or in some instances not amenable at all to supporting women who are going through menopause. So really the beauty of any legislative provision is that we provide robust equal treatment, and that has to be an objective of a modern economy. So I would hope and I would be enthusiastic that is something that we will see on the horizon.
Yeah, fantastic. And of course, as we know, and certainly something that we discussed, Katie, is, as you'll remember, as part of the inaugural summit in the Round Room in the Mansion House on the 23rd of March this year. I mean, there is so much research coming back from different sectors in terms of this whole area where women feel, the real need and are being vocal about the fact that they need to be supported in menopause. And of course, we also understand from the research that quite a large number of women either thought about or actually chose to leave the workplace due to the lack of these supports, which of course is not just, a problem for those particular women. And of course that is a problem for them, but is also a wider problem because you've got brain drain, you've got people with years of experience but leaving employment. And of course, that's a huge loss to any organization.
Yeah, I think that in the statistics that we looked at in March, about 60% of people who participated in a study said that they had, felt negative impacts in terms of how things were working out for them, or indeed not working out for them, as a consequence of the symptoms that they were experiencing, which we have to remember all the time are not elective. And that so 60% were hampered and had negative reactions in terms of how the manifestation of menopause and them carrying out their work activities was occurring. And then 12% said that they contemplated leaving their position of employment. So I think that you've touched on the sort of macro significance of this. This is not just the individual in the workplace. The very important wider issue here is societal. It's great to say that in Q3 of 2023, the CSO tell us that we are at full employment. We have 4.1% unemployment at the moment. Ask any employer and they will tell you that it is excruciating to try and fill a position, or indeed where organizations are trying to grow, that they're finding it very difficult to expand their business because they haven't got sufficient supply of labor. So if we're going to bleed persons from the workforce as a direct consequence of there being no legitimate recognition of the symptoms of menopause and how, for example, they could be reasonably accommodated, that would seem to be a no-brainer. It is very much a hallmark of a modern economy that you are able to have a workforce that can rapidly upskill. That workforce quite rightly is looking for security of tenure. So they want high quality employment with a security of tenure. And they want to be able to also have work-life balance. So I think that really, policies and legislative provisions, should they manifest, are really in that space of work-life balance that is so important to the wider Irish society, while also enabling women of menopausal age to sustain their employment and contribute to the economy and indeed to whatever sector it is that they're working in.
And also very important, Katie, for staff retention, because if you and I have, similar jobs in different organizations, and you and your organization are offered these supports as part of your health and well-being policy or your HR policy in the organization, and I don't, that's not a great position for my employer to be in.
No, it's very clear that we have a global economy, and that people moving around in the economy has become a feature. In fact, the recent Employee Transparent Working Conditions Directive now has removed what was possible in employment contracts, prohibiting somebody from having a second employment. So that to me demonstrates that the employee is highly mobile, they're highly informed, and they will vote with their feet in terms of they're getting similar maybe rate of pay, similar hours of work, but they're not getting those work-life balance in company A. They will port over to the competitor.
Of course.
Absolutely. That is the case.
Yeah.
So we see that it's very important rather for retainment for employers to have, to be aware of these disruptors whereby they have control over, and that is something that an employer has control over, whereas clearly they don't have as much control over, unfortunately, something like the Ukrainian war or the rate of inflation. So everything that an employer can do to retain their valuable staff would appear to be the correct and important and logical thing to do in relation to your business.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, from my own perspective, when I was building out the program for the National Menopause Summit, it was really important for me. And it was actually born, and I'll be honest about this, from my own personal experience initially, the whole workplace piece, because around the sort of mid 2020 when brain fog, and I've said this so many times, Katie, and I know you get it. So, brain fog sounds like some little fairy sitting on your shoulder. I know it's on a spectrum. It doesn't necessarily manifest itself in a hideously dramatic way in the way that it did for me, was just brain paralysis. And I was one of those people that truly believed my career is over. It's over because I can't manage everything. And it's just completely overwhelming. So now I obviously work in a very small little organization, so we could manage that. There's just myself and my business partner, Shell. But for women who are in a larger organization, in an environment where there is nobody to speak to, where you are literally struggling with the most sort of simple task of your job, which means, of course, the more overwhelming ones are just a non-runner completely. I could totally empathize with how women would think who are in that situation. I can't, this is just not worth my life, this stuff, not worth my peace of mind continuing on here. And it's tragic and completely unnecessary.
Yeah, and in very extreme circumstances where people have effectively been constructively dismissed because they were left with no option but to leave for all of those reasons, and there being no engagement or support around those. And that's presuming, of course, that the individuals affected had at least attempted to bring those issues to the notice of their employer. But in circumstances, persons have left, and then they have gone to forums like the Workplace Relations Commission, and indeed in some instances appealed on to the Labour Court. And we do have, albeit a small cohort of case law, it is growing in terms of persons certainly making the complaint that they have been discriminated against. And obviously each case proceeds on its own merits, but we certainly do have Labour Court decisions that would endorse, circumstances where somebody had menopause and the particular challenges for them was similar to what you've averred to, like acute stress.
Yes.
And that was obviously negatively impacting on their employment. And, they advocated that. But the employer never went the step of considering any accommodations around that.
Yes.
So, this is the dynamic that I suppose it's there to be utilized, but one would always endorse policy,
of course,
over litigation.
of course.
And so back to your opening question, if we can get to a point in Ireland where we have a statutory provision that will support and recognise the instances and the impacts of menopause, and will put in place, the facilitation of accommodations for people who find themselves in this particular set of circumstances. And bearing in mind that it is, relatively speaking, transient,
yes,
albeit it can manifest for a number of years for some people, that is the better way to go in terms of advocating for a transparent, egalitarian approach
absolutely.
to inclusive employment, rather than putting it up to individuals who have the wherewithal to face into some form of litigation as a consequence of the way they were treated in the workplace, which is a direct consequence of this physiological event in their reproductive life cycle.
Yes.
So one would love to think that we could get to the space whereby, as I say, we have this underpinning, and that we would only end up litigating where employers literally choose to turn their face against the statutory obligations and not comply.
Yes. So obviously more of a carrot rather than a stick approach. Why not just, just embed these policies into your overall company policies and save yourself the potential, cost and grief and hassle further down the road.
Yeah. And look at, we have evolved as an island. We have evolved in terms of the really broad range of ethnicity in our society. We need, obviously, to constantly be looking at measures in terms of statutory and policy measures around, genuine inclusivity.
Yes.
And this is an area that is about inclusivity.
Absolutely.
Because if people are having to have a terrible time and all of that, and that impacts on productivity, morale, etc., or at the very nuclear end of that, if people are saying, I can't sustain this anymore, I have to leave employment, that's a problem for wider society.
Oh, absolutely.
Whereas if we take an inclusive approach, and we have evidence of being successful at this. We introduced employment equality law, which recognizes that we don't treat people differently because of their ethnicity, sexual orientation, their family status, as well as the issues that touch off on menopause, which of course are gender and age and possibly disability.
Yeah.
And we've been very good at introducing measures in terms of ensuring that that level playing pitch is provided, and then, as importantly, that level playing pitch is maintained.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. So this needs to be a part of that, because as you were saying yourself there, Katie, and rightly so, there is an absolute focus on inclusivity in society across the workplace and in other areas as well. So, this is equally relevant that be included in that whole inclusivity piece. But having said that, I would say, and I'm sure you'd probably agree with me, but well, I hope you will. We've certainly come very far since 2022, when this whole conversation burst out of the shadows, if you like, and was being sort of included in the public discourse, if you like, because from something. It's almost, it feels like it's going on longer, but it's such a short period of time after generations of taboo and shame and don't talk about it. It's great to see, I suppose, relatively speaking, the speed at which people are getting up to speed. Nice bit of English there, Sinead. But you know what I mean, in terms of getting...
I think I agree. I think that it validates the various perspectives and platforms that yourself and other people have stood on to advocate for the recognition of this significant part of more than half of the population's
absolutely
life cycle in terms of their coming to the end of their fertility, and the fact that this is something that has a domino effect, and it can be something that, when supported, is minimally impactful on the individual and the wider society. Yes. And that's really what this campaign, if I can call it a campaign, or agenda, is about. That, you know, at these different, I'd see it as a patchwork quilt, and there are these different elements, and we're endeavouring as a group to deliver the big picture, as it were, in terms of putting these disparate up until now components and people, as you said, not talking about this issue simply because they feel, or we're feeling, hopefully historically now, that they couldn't discuss something like the end of their fertility cycle and the complications and the challenges that was throwing up, or indeed for women who are about to approach the beginning of perimenopause, that they're very fearful in terms of what was a taboo subject. And if this must be terrible, because my older women that I know are not talking to me about this. So I think that what we want is transparency, and we want to have an adult conversation. And I think another important thing is that we must recognize that we have to resource members of the workforce who are encountering menopause. So there's a huge job of work there to be done in supporting, in particular, line managers to have the skill set.
Absolutely.
To be empathetic, to be sensitive, to be balanced, to be consistent, to be informed in terms of this particular topic. Because when people understand it in the way that they very clearly do, and I'll use the analogy of maternity requirements in the workplace, that's something that is done as a matter of course and with great ease. And what we want to do is to get, hopefully, to the same end destination in terms of the menopause in the workplace.
Absolutely. And of course, just mirroring what you're saying, Katie, there's no merit in just including this in your HR policies and it lives on a dusty shelf somewhere and the box is ticked. That's not going to cut the mustard.
No, it has to be a lived policy.
Yes.
And so doing things like celebrating International Menopause Day, championing
and normalizing it all. So just, exactly. Absolutely.
They're all very positive, sort of soft initiatives. So we can have those, hopefully, in collaboration with some legislative developments. And that will definitely bring us to an improved space in terms of menopause on the workplace.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And just very briefly to touch on introducing policies in organizations, like literally going about that. So we're very lucky, as you know, Katie, and she's joining us again, to have Joanne Healy, who's head of employee relations at Bank of Ireland, and Joanne, who's also a barrister, introduced the menopause supports pre-Christmas last year, where the bank introduced, God bless them, 10 days paid menopause leave as part of that policy. I suppose it's important to say, and I'm always kind of, feel it's very important to mention this, that, the introduction of menopause policies from an employer perspective doesn't have to be a scary undertaking. Obviously, everybody isn't in a position, all organizations aren't in the position that the bank are in, where they can offer 10 days paid menopause leave. So it can be offered, I suppose, if you like. There's the spectrum of menopause awareness and training, and then there's the likes of big organizations like the bank. But that's not to say that there isn't a place on that spectrum for you, depending on the size of your company and the amount of people employed there and all of that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. I think the first thing is the cultural imperative of the organization. So if your organization can move to the space whereby menopause is something that is transparently spoken about,
Mm.
that there is a policy created regardless of, at the moment we don't have any statutory underpinning.
Yeah.
So anything that an employer would do would be their own internal initiative. Now, there are some great examples out in the Irish workplace. You touched on Bank of Ireland. On Post have also recently introduced a menopause policy, and there's a whole range of organisations that are just at the point of doing that. And that's really valuable, because that is something that employer organizations are looking to other entities, and they are benching themselves.
Yes.
But I think in terms of, a lot of the economy in Ireland is made up of small to medium enterprise. So there is an acceptance that you're not going to have a comparable largesse. But nonetheless, for example, if you are applying a support system and that has some element of reasonable accommodation of an individual's menopausal symptoms, then that of itself can be enough in many instances to mitigate against the challenges that individuals are experiencing. And we do know, and we say always, that menopause is very much a personal experience, and one size does not fit all, and that people could be twins and menopausal and have very different symptoms. So I think that a recognition of that is also important culturally. But I think that the key thing is that there is a positive disposition, and that the employer is remembering all the time that this is a valuable asset in terms of my organization, and I am in a positive two-way relationship with this person, and I want to underpin, and sometimes we don't talk about this much in the world of employment law, but it's very important, this thing, the psychological contract. And the psychological contract is essentially implicit in the written contract, where both people are effectively making an undertaking to each other outside of the legal parameters.
That makes sense.
The psychological contract, for example, manifests when people at the last minute are asked, would they be able to give a dig out for maybe an hour because something unprecedented or unscheduled has happened. Now, they're finished their time that day, etc. But the psychological contract says, well, I'm invested in you because you're invested in me.
So
in terms of human resource management and the world of work, any professional will tell you that there is a distinct value add in terms of the psychological contract. So the psychological contract lives in the cultural space, not in the legal space. And it's really important. And they are the people who go the extra mile. They are the people who are engaged in whatever drive the business is engaged in. They are the ambassadors of the business. And all businesses hope and want to have people like that in their workforce.
Absolutely.
But it has to be that give and take.
It has to be
you change up your cultural imperative to include dynamics like menopause awareness and menopause policy, you get that value add from the workforce at whatever point that policy is relevant to them.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, Katie, look, that was hugely informative, and thank you so much. Is there anything that you would like to add at all? And you're under no pressure to do so, but is there anything else you'd like to add before we sign off today?
No, I'm very much looking forward to the second installation of the Menopause Summit, and the conversation that will arise in terms of the very different lenses that your panelists are bringing to this really interesting topic, and really looking forward to engaging with the people who attend.
Absolutely,
in terms of questions, etc., or information that they may be looking for. So looking forward to seeing you in person on the 20th.
And same, looking forward to seeing you as well. Katie, and I was just before I will go, I was chatting on the last menopause supports with M&S with Siobhan O'Donovan, the posture fitting physio, the booby physio as she calls herself. And we were just touching on the fact, and I've no doubt that we'll recreate, or this will be recreated at the Cork Summit. There was such a unique vibe, if I can use that word, at the event in Dublin. Really supportive, positive. People got up outside of kind of the legal side of things, or the workplace piece, got up and shared the most intimate details of their menopause because they felt they were in a safe space. And I think what's really unique and what made it so magic, and will make it magic again in Cork, is that when are you in a venue where, in the case of Cork, because it's a bigger venue than the Round Room, where you have 700 plus people who are there to actively learn and discuss and share around menopause. So that was something, as an event organizer, you can never legislate for in advance. Do you know what I mean? And I all the years of organizing events, I've never experienced that before. So I'm also really looking forward to that just really lovely vibe in the room on the day, on the 20th of October. I've no doubt Cork will be just as gracious in that regard as everybody in Dublin was. It was absolutely fantastic. We'll sign off on that note, and thank you again, Katie, for your time today and that wonderful, invaluable information that you shared with us. Enjoy the rest of your day, guys, and we'll see you again.
Thanks indeed. See you then.
Thanks, Katie. Thank you.
Bye.